Breaking news today, a federal judge has blocked the release of Special Counsel Jack Smith's report. Judge Aileen Cannon made the ruling today, forcing the Justice Department to temporarily halt the release of the 2-volume report that details the investigations into Trump's handling of classified documents and efforts to block the transfer of power after the 2020 election. In another ruling today, a New York appeals court has declined to block sentencing in Trump's hush money case. Joining me now is the Hill's courts and legal reporter, Zach Schonfeld. Zach, thanks so much for coming on. The emergency motion was successful, but the motion is also before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit. Is it actually that court that will make a final decision on the report?
Yeah, this decision of whether to release Special Counsel Jack Smith's final report does seem now to be coming down to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. As you mentioned, Judge Aileen Cannon, who is the judge who oversaw the trial proceedings before she dismissed this documents case this summer, she issued an order that effectively prevents the Justice Department from publicly disseminating this report until 3 days after the 11th Circuit rules. And timing really is the name of the game here, because as you and I are sitting here, we're just under 2 weeks away from the inauguration. And of course, once Trump takes the oath of office, he'll take control of the Justice Department. And if the report isn't out by then, it's not expected that the Trump administration is going to want to see that see the light of day. So the question becomes, will Jack Smith be able to get it out in the 2 weeks before Trump takes office? And as of right now, under this current court order, he cannot. So it's going to be up to this 3-judge panel on the 11th Circuit as to whether they are going to allow this report to come out before the 20th.
Also want to ask you about what we're hearing just here in the last breaking news is that the court is not going to block sentencing in the hush money case. What does that mean? Is there any recourse for Trump ahead of that sentencing, or is it going to go through as planned?
Yeah, this ruling just came down actually just a few minutes ago. I've got it here in front of me, just a 1-sentence order from this appeals court judge writing that the interim stay is denied. No explanation, saying that she considered the extensive oral argument, which was held early this afternoon, but saying that the appeals court, at least as of now, will not step in to stop the sentencing. So as of now, Donald Trump is scheduled to be sentenced on these 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in only a few days. That's set to happen Friday morning in downtown Manhattan. Now, of course, we've seen by Trump before, he is willing to fight these things all the way up until the last second. So although right now he got another loss today, I wouldn't be shocked if we see some more filings and some more activity between now and Friday. But as of right now, you know, we've just seen in the last few days, Trump is really trying to pulling out all the stops to block this sentencing. Yesterday, we saw the trial judge in this case, Judge Juan Merchan. He declined to put it on hold. Now the appeals court is declining to put it on hold. He can keep trying to go up the chain, but he's starting to run out of options here.
Back to that classified documents case, 2 of Trump's co-defendants are still facing charges. Is there an assumption that once the Trump administration takes over, Pam Bondi, if she's confirmed, would be his attorney general, that those cases would just go away?
Yeah, that's the assumption. One way or another, these are probably headed to their end. Now, the new Trump administration will have a few pathways to get there. You know, first of all, Trump, once he becomes president, will have pardon power for federal offenses. So if he wanted to, he could pardon his 2 former co-defendants in this case. That would effectively bring this case to an end. Or he could also have his Justice Department drop the current appeal that's ongoing. As I mentioned before, Judge Aileen Cannon had actually dismissed this case last year after finding that the special counsel here was unlawfully appointed. So for this case to even move forward, the Justice Department would actually now need to win that appeal at the 11th Circuit. So one simple option is they could just stop that appeal from moving forward. It's also important to point out that at this point, the cases to Trump's former 2 co-defendants, that's no longer in the hands of the special counsel's office. Special counsel Jack Smith has already handed off this case now to the U.S. attorney, the local attorney down there in Florida, who will be making these decisions. But Trump will have control of the Justice Department, of course, now in just under 2 weeks.
This week, Trump has said that he will replace the National Archives and Records Administration leader. That person was involved in this issue with the classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. Is replacing that person retaliation for that involvement?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I don't think in years past we've paid a whole lot of attention to who's going to be leading the National Archives. But as you mentioned, this has become a pretty big topic of conversation in the last few years, given the National Archives' role in how this classified documents case came to be. It was the National Archives that originally, after Trump got out of office, was the agency that was starting to raise concerns about the fact that he had kept on to these documents and brought them to Mar-a-Lago. The Archives was the one that sent a letter to DOJ alerting them to this. I should note that happened before the current head of the National Archives got into that role, so she was not the one who sent the letter. But even so, there have obviously been tensions because of that between Trump and the National Archives. So, I think it's not too much surprise that, he cares a little bit now more about this appointment maybe than he would have just a few years ago.
Let's talk about Trump's former attorney, Rudy Giuliani. He was found in contempt of court on Monday for failing to hand over personal assets to these Georgia poll workers that filed lawsuits against him. What's at stake for Giuliani now? I think we're still missing some details on the sanctions.
Yeah, so at this point, the election workers have now been fighting for just over a year to try to get most of Rudy Giuliani's assets to satisfy their $146 million defamation judgment. Now, the amount of assets they're expected to recover is going to be far less than that. Giuliani, when he had filed for bankruptcy in the wake of all this, he had disclosed just under $11 million in assets, so far lower than that $146 million number. But that's also why, because as we've been talking about, Rudy Giuliani being in these contempt of court proceedings, oftentimes when we talk about contempt, the punishment can usually be some sort of fine or paying attorney's fees. But Rudy Giuliani has already been forced to give up most of his assets, so there's really nothing left in terms of, from a monetary point of view for the workers to take. So at this point, they're really just trying to be able to seize his assets because there are still some battles that are ongoing, and they do want some punishments in the sake of adverse inferences drawn against him in some of these forthcoming battles.
One of those assets in question is this condo in Palm Beach, right? Giuliani has argued this is his primary residence. The judge hasn't seemed too thrilled with that argument from Giuliani. What's going to happen there?
Yeah, because of these contempt of court proceedings, this is going to be a major blow for him now as he hopes to hold on to his Florida condo. This is a matter that's going to go to trial later this month, starting January 16th. Rudy Giuliani has argued that this is his primary residence and he is entitled to claim it as his homestead, which would effectively mean that the election workers are not able to take control of that asset, that Rudy Giuliani would be able to remain in control. And this is now his only major property. He also had a New York City apartment, but he was forced to give that up in the wake of these lawsuits. This is really his only home at this point. So the argument that we've heard from him and his attorneys is if the judge doesn't go his way, that they're effectively going to make him homeless at this point. So that's a battle that's still to come. But as I was mentioning in those sanctions and those adverse inferences, the punishment for Giuliani here, the judge said, they're still going to figure out the full extent of the sanctions later. But we know at least as of now, the judge is going to draw some adverse inferences that is going to prevent him from making certain defenses and certain arguments as he tries to hold on to this condo.
All right, great insight as always. We'll continue to follow. Zach Schonfeld, thanks so much.
Thanks, Drew.
Today, the new U.S. House passed its first piece of legislation aimed at illegal immigration. The Laken Riley Act is named after a nursing student in Georgia who was murdered last year by an undocumented immigrant. But many activists are alarmed by the language included in the bill, which would force the Department of Homeland Security to take undocumented immigrants into custody if they are arrested for certain nonviolent offenses. Joining me now is the Hill staff writer, Rafael Bernal, with more on the bill. Rafael, thanks so much. This bill is going to be the first of the 119th Congress that addresses immigration. What is included in this law?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It sends a strong message, obviously, starting with Laken Riley, this case that was a very important part of the Republican case on the border and immigration. One of the major issues that immigration advocates have with this law is it allows states to sue the federal government over a series of immigration enforcement issues that each state may see. This including, for instance, a state could sue the federal government for issuing visas to a country that has refused to take back any deportee. So it could essentially turn over federal immigration policy to the hands of states that may have a very different view of immigration, whether it is, a Republican or Democratic administration at the federal level or for each state.
The bill would require Homeland Security to take any migrant who has been charged with a crime like theft into custody. Immigrants' rights groups say this is a dangerous precedent. Can you explain what their argument here is?
Well, it's sort of a twofold thing. Any larceny-related accusation, not necessarily a conviction, would force DHS to take these migrants into custody or these immigrants into custody. That is it's a twofold problem. Basically, on one hand, it prevents immigrants from having a bond hearing. An immigrant who is currently detained can have a bond hearing and prove to a judge that they're not gonna run away, that they're gonna show up for their court date, that they don't pose a danger to society, and that obviously there's a savings. And then the other side of it is also is goes back again to it takes away from the federal government the ability to implement its own immigration policy as it sees fit.
This is the second time the bill has been on the House floor. It never passed the Senate when it was under Democratic control. Now Republicans control the Senate. Do you think it has the support to pass? And I will note that some Democrats have actually supported this in the past, right?
Yes, and apparently the Senator John Fetterman, a Democrat from Pennsylvania, is lead co-sponsor in the Senate. You have two Democrats who, as members of the House, voted for it, Elisa Slotkin of Michigan and Ruben Gallego of Arizona, who are now in the Senate. So it does stand a chance. There's a lot of concern. Some Democratic senators, the more progressive Democratic senators, are voicing that concern that it just really takes 7 Democrats. And it's not that big of a stretch, assuming you already have those 3. It's not necessarily the case because you have someone like Gallego who was running for office, and there's this issue of a bill like this named after a victim of a heinous crime like Laken Riley. It's very difficult to vote against the bill, regardless of the bill's contents, just because a vote against it could be interpreted, and certainly during campaign season will be interpreted as a lack of sympathy toward that victim.
All right, Rafael Bernal, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Jimmy Carter returned to Washington today one final time, where he'll lie in state beneath the Capitol Rotunda. Thousands are expected to pay their respects as the nation says goodbye to its 39th president. Next, our nation's Washington correspondent Trevor Shirley in D.C. with more.
The president's remains are expected to be seen by thousands of visitors between today and Thursday, when he'll leave the Capitol headed for the National Cathedral.
When you think about servant leadership, which is a mantra that I learned in the Army, President Carter embodies that in so many ways.
Before the former president's remains arrive at the Capitol today, his motorcade will pause at the U.S. Naval Memorial in honor of his Navy service. Afterwards, a ceremony will welcome him into the Capitol, where his family will then be given private time with his remains before doors open to the public.
In the end of the era, a very sad moment, but also a moment for inspiration.
Public viewing to see President Carter's casket inside the Capitol Rotunda opens this evening. Reporting in Washington, I'm Trevor Shirley.
Next stars, Trevor Shirley. Thank you. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.